Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at this idea of speaking English like a native speaker. You've given me some really great stuff to go through here, and so I think our mission today is to figure out what makes someone sound, natural and confident when they're speaking English, and then give you some actual takeaways, things that you can start doing today to improve your English.
Yeah. Yeah. And, for a lot of people, the goal isn't just about being understood. It's really about having that effortless, authentic kind of quality in their speech. So in this deep dive, I think what we want to do is go beyond just pronunciation and look at all these different elements that make someone sound like a native speaker.
Right. And this resource that you gave me, I think it does a really good job of breaking down the different parts of that. It's not just mimicking an accent, right?
Wow.
So let's jump right in. What does it actually mean to speak English like a native speaker?
Yeah. So the first big point I think that this resource makes is that it's not all about accent. While pronunciation is a part of it, I think speaking like a native speaker really means using the expressions and understanding those subtle cultural things that are just kind of woven into the language. You might pronounce all the words right, but you still might not sound quite right if you're not using the language the way that a native speaker would.
I get that. It's almost like knowing all the notes in a song, but not being able to play it with the right feel. So what are some of the key areas that this resource points to?
Well, it kind of breaks it down into four main parts. First, there's pronunciation and intonation. And this is more than just making the sounds correctly. It's the rhythm and stress patterns within sentences and words, the melody of the language. And understanding this is really key because, wrong intonation can even change what your words mean, even if all the sounds are correct.
Right. So it's not just the sounds themselves, but how they all fit together. What's next?
The next one is vocabulary and phrasal verbs. So this is all about using the language that native speakers use every day, not just formal or really basic words. Instead of spend time, you'd say hang out. Those kinds of choices really make a difference.
So it's about knowing the common, informal way to say things.
Got it.
What else is there?
Right. The third part is idioms and expressions. These are all those colorful, sometimes non-literal parts of the language. If someone's going on stage, we say break a leg. Understanding these and using them correctly can really make your English sound more vibrant and natural.
Yeah, and those can be super hard for learners because they don't always translate directly.
That's right. And then finally, there's confidence and fluency. This isn't about speaking fast. It's about speaking smoothly without too much hesitation. And, this usually comes as you start to get better with all the other things we've been talking about.
So basically, if you can really understand these four areas, pronunciation and intonation, vocabulary, idioms, and fluency, it gives you a roadmap to sound more like a native speaker. It's about a lot more than just getting the accent right.
Exactly. When you know that it's all these things working together, you can focus better. It's about slowly improving your speech, not trying to sound perfect overnight.
Okay, so now we have a better idea of what speaking like a native really means. I think the next question is, how do you actually get better in these areas? What are the concrete steps? I know your source has some really practical strategies to share with us, so let's dig into those.
Yeah, there are a few things you can start doing right away. The first thing is immersion.
Which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Surround yourself with English. But what does the source actually say about immersion?
Yeah, so it goes beyond just having English on in the background. It's about actively watching movies and TV shows in English, really listening to how people speak. It also mentions something called shadowing, which is really interesting.
Shadowing. What is that?
So basically, you listen to a native speaker, maybe in a podcast or a video, and you repeat what they're saying at the same time. You try to copy their pronunciation, their intonation, everything. One person I worked with found this really helpful. He said it was like being an echo, and it helped him to get the natural flow of the language.
Huh. That's interesting. So it's a very active way to train your ear and your mouth.
Yeah, exactly. Then the source talks about focusing on your pronunciation and intonation, really intentionally practicing. And they suggest using what are called minimal pairs.
Minimal pairs, just for those who might not know, what are those?
So minimal pairs are words that are only different by one sound, like pen and pin, or ship and sheep. By practicing these pairs, you learn to hear those little differences in sound that can be really important.
Right, so it's like training your ear to recognize these little differences. Does the source recommend any tools to help with this?
Yeah, they talk about using technology, like apps. There's one called Elsa Speak that actually gives you feedback on your pronunciation. And then there's Youglish, where you can see and hear how words are used in real videos. These can help you get a better sense of how things are supposed to sound.
Technology can definitely be a big help when you're learning a language. Now, what about vocabulary? How do you get better with that?
Well, the source really emphasizes intentionally learning new vocabulary, especially common expressions and phrasal verbs. Like a simple example they give is instead of saying, I am very tired, you could say, I'm exhausted. Small changes like that make a big difference.
So basically just upgrading your everyday vocabulary. What else?
Another big one is thinking in English. Don't translate from your native language. Try to form your thoughts directly in English. The source even suggests keeping a journal in English, which could be a good exercise.
Yeah, I see how that would help. It forces you to use English on its own without relying on your native language.
Right. And then last but not least, you have to actively practice speaking. Talk with other people as much as possible. Find a language partner or join a conversation group. And, there are apps like Cambly or HelloTalk where you can connect with native speakers online.
You can know everything about a language in theory, but you won't really get fluent until you start using it. So, immersion, practicing pronunciation, building your vocabulary, thinking in English, and speaking as much as possible. That's a pretty comprehensive approach.
It is. And all of these are things you can start doing today. You don't need to wait.
Okay, so we've covered what it means to sound natural and some real strategies to improve, but I'm guessing it's not always easy. Are there common mistakes that people make along the way? What does your source say about that?
Yeah, the source points out a few common mistakes. One is overthinking grammar. Now, obviously, grammar is important, but if you're thinking about every rule while you're trying to talk, it's going to make you sound really unnatural. You have to find a balance between being correct and sounding natural.
Right, because you can get so focused on being grammatically correct that you end up hesitating all the time. But isn't it important to have a strong understanding of grammar eventually? How do you find that balance?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the key is to learn grammar through constant exposure and practice, not by trying to memorize rules. Think of it like driving. You learn the rules of the road, but eventually you just start driving without thinking about them too much.
Okay, I like that analogy. What's another common mistake?
Another one is speaking too fast. People sometimes think that speaking fast makes them sound more fluent, but actually speaking at a more natural pace makes you sound more confident, and it's easier for people to understand you.
Yeah, it's much better to be clear and understood than to rush and make a bunch of mistakes. What else?
The source also talks about translating word for word from your native language. This can be really tricky because languages express ideas in different ways, and direct translations often sound awkward.
I see. Languages don't always translate perfectly, do they? What's an example of that?
Yeah, well, in some languages, you might translate a phrase about feeling cold directly, but in English, we might say, I'm freezing. Even though we're not literally freezing, learning these natural English expressions is super important.
That makes sense. Is there anything else to watch out for?
One more thing is intonation. If you speak in a flat, monotone voice, it's going to sound really robotic. Even if your pronunciation is perfect, you have to practice the natural rise and fall of your voice, the melody of English. That's what makes you sound like a native speaker.
Right, so it's not just the words themselves, but how you say them, the emphasis, the rhythm, all of that. I think knowing these pitfalls is super helpful because it makes you aware of things you might be doing without realizing it.
Absolutely. It's about being aware of these habits so you can work on them.
Okay, so we've covered what it means to sound natural, strategies for improving, and mistakes to avoid. But learning a language should be fun too, right? What does your source say about making the learning process more enjoyable?
Yeah, for sure. Learning should be fun. The source has a few ideas for making practice more enjoyable. One that I really like is called the imitation game.
Okay, that sounds fun. How does that work?
So you pick a short clip from a movie or a TV show, maybe like 30 seconds to a minute, where native speakers are talking. Watch it a few times so you understand what's going on, and then try to copy exactly how the actors are speaking. Their pronunciation, their intonation, even their little pauses and things. It's a really immersive way to learn. I had a student who used to do this with stand-up comedy routines, and it really helped his rhythm and timing.
Wow, that sounds like a fun way to practice.
It is. Another classic exercise is tongue twisters.
Oh, yeah, those can be tough.
They can be, but they're a great way to work on specific sounds that you find difficult. The source gives the example, she sells seashells by the seashore. That one's perfect for practicing those S and she sounds.
Yeah, definitely a good warm-up for your mouth. What other ideas does the source give?
Well, they also talk about recording yourself.
I bet that could be kind of awkward for some people.
It can be, but it's super helpful. When you record yourself speaking and then listen back, you really start to notice the areas where your pronunciation or intonation is different from a native speaker. And then you can compare yourself to native speakers and see where you need to improve. It's like having your own personal coach.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So it gives you a way to get objective feedback on how you're doing.
Exactly. And then finally, there's the Daily English Challenge.
What is that?
It's a simple idea. Every day, you learn one new English phrase or idiom, and then you try to use it in conversation that same day. This helps you to actually use the new vocabulary you're learning, which is how you make it stick.
Yeah, that sounds like a good way to make steady progress without feeling overwhelmed. Just one new phrase each day.
Right. All of these exercises are about making practice more fun and more effective, so you can really enjoy the process of getting better at English.
So just to recap, we've really gotten into the details of what it means to speak English like a native speaker. It's about a lot more than just pronunciation. It's about intonation, vocabulary, natural expressions, and fluency.
And we've talked about specific things you can do, like immersing yourself in the language, practicing specific sounds, and thinking and speaking in English as much as possible.
We also talked about some common mistakes to watch out for, like focusing too much on grammar or translating too literally. And of course, we looked at some fun ways to practice, like the imitation game, tongue twisters, and the daily English challenge.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
So for all of you listening, think about which of these techniques you can start using. Maybe you'll try shadowing for a few minutes each day, or maybe you'll try learning one new phrase. Even small changes can make a big difference over time. What part of sounding like a native speaker is most important to you? And what one small step can you take today to start moving towards that goal? That's what we want you to take away from this deep dive.